Welcome to the Speak Hope Now podcast. It's so good to be here with Will Masteller, and he goes by Moss if you know him and if you're from this Berwick area. So we're glad to have him here on this podcast today. And we're in this series called When Mental Health and Life Collide. Specifically today, we're talking about when mental health and fitness collides. Hey, Will, tell us a little bit about yourself. Talk to us about your background. You said you want to help the town here a little bit more. So talk to us about that vision, about that dream that you have.
Okay. First, I want to say thanks for having me, Keith. Donnie, thanks for having me. The vision with that is, for me, it's kind of about working hard and doing the right thing. I feel a lot of things, if you work hard and you do the right thing, a lot of good things can go your way. I think what you find is when people are not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, then that's when they come into these situations where, they're depressed. This is where the mental health starts coming. They might be depressed. They might be sad. It feels like they don't have a purpose, right? They don't know, what direction to go in. So sometimes, I'll tell people, that old saying, follow your heart. Do what feels right. And it's rather do something than do nothing at all. And I think a lot of mental health stems from people not knowing what to do, and then they just don't do anything. They're like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm just not going to do anything. But in my experiences, working hard and working really hard, whether or not, I was going down the right road, eventually put me in a position to go down the right road. And, at times, I've been sad, I've been depressed, I've been those things myself as well. But it's put me in situations where I was able to learn. And if you're not doing anything, if you're not experiencing anything, you're not going to be able to learn because you're not going to put yourself in experiences to learn from. So I would say the biggest thing for people that are suffering from mental health is, just kind of tune into yourself, right? Tune into yourself and just ask yourself, simple questions, simple things like, what do I like to do? What I'm doing now, is it making me happy? And these questions are questions that are, how often are they asked? Like, how often do people actually ask themselves these questions? They go through this whole day and, they're sad or they're depressed or they have this type of mental issue, and they never look in the mirror and they say, am I actually happy? Like, am I doing what I want to be doing? And, there's the thing here, in America is we have more opportunities than a lot of other places in the world, whether or not, you want to admit it or not, but we have, a constitution, we have these freedoms. There's a lot of other places in the world that, you can't say what you want to say, you can't do what you want to do. So, there's a stipulation that, if you're a certain race or if you're this, you're that, you can't do these things, which is completely false. You can do anything that you want to do. I mean, obviously, if you have some type of disability, like if you're missing 2 legs, you're probably not going to run a very fast. Like if you wanted to be a runner, you're probably not going to be the best runner in the world. Like it's just, you have a disability. But it doesn't mean that you can't go do other things. You just have to find what you're good at.
Well, in the Olympics, they
have the Special Olympics.
They have the Special Olympics, and you see a lot of people that will, have a double amputee type of a situation, and they're running, and they make the equipment for it. So
exactly, that's true.
Not to spoof off of your name there, but where there's a will,
there's
a way.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of times people can get sucked into the mentality of, my environment keeps me from being able to move forward.
Yes.
From being able to have that purpose. And we know in our town, Berwick, some parts of Columbia County, the poverty level is really high. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people say, well, I can't do that. I can't be that because I don't have the resources or my family or, I'll never be able to obtain that. There's nobody else in my family that's doing that. So, I got to table that dream or table that vision that I have for myself. And it becomes a challenge that people place before them. It's not a challenge necessarily that others have placed before them. It's a challenge that they put in front of themselves that they can't seem to get over. I've known quite a few people. We'll probably try to get them on as guests as well. But I've known, some individuals in our town that came from homes that were, pretty depressed financially and, the tough home lives. Yep. And they've gone on to be doctors here in our community. They've gone on to be, professionals either on TV or in sports, and people like yourself. I mean, you're successful. What's the definition of success? Success is reaching the vision and the goal that you have for yourself.
Exactly. And it'll vary, for everybody. What, somebody might say you're not successful, but, you set a goal for yourself and you met those goals. So, individually, and as in my personal opinion, I've reached the success that I set out for myself. And I think that is, sometimes an issue in a community where somebody might say, you're not really successful because you didn't do this, but I think a lot of it comes with self-worth to know, like, hey, I did what I set out I was going to do. A lot of people will say things without actually knowing where you came from, and I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying about how, people have these disadvantages. They're in these home situations where, they're not by, like, statistically, you're like, oh, statistically, this person from this place cannot, like, they just can't do this. It's all just, I think it's all just an area where there's no such thing as cannot. You can do anything that you want to. You can do anything that you want to do if you put your mind to it. But I will say, for some, it's harder than others.
Right.
Okay. We're all born equally in terms of what we can accomplish as long as we, given disabilities and things, that's a certain, thing that's going to change, like, what you can do. But, say it's a totally healthy person, now somebody who's, came up in, like, a wealthy family, and then somebody that came from a non-wealthy family, obviously somebody from a wealthy family is going to have resources that somebody that from a non-wealthy family is going to have. But as far as your mind, what you think, what you say, your actions, those are all dependent on you as an individual. So, you can ultimately decide your fate, but once again, your route to, your dream or your success might be, or most probably will be, if you come from a non-wealthy family, is going to be more difficult, but there's a lot of pros and cons to those things. Because you see people, you were just telling me earlier, you see people that come from nothing and they make something of themselves. Sure. And then you see people that come from a lot and they digress and they become nothing.
Well, look at the people in our town, in our small town of Berwick. We're a little over 10,000 people. And you look at some of the people that are active in our community that have established businesses for themselves, or they've accomplished greater things outside of the town of Berwick, and then they've come back and they've poured into this area to try to inspire and try to help the community. I mean, I think of people like Georgie, who started Georgie's Bagels. He was a boxer,
good guy.
Right?
Yep, boxer.
And he
has a gym right in the basement.
Brought that money back right to our town.
Yeah. He's a good guy,
Boosie
Georgie
Simmons. Do you know Boosie Simmons?
Boosie has the barber shop.
Faded.
He also did boxing for a little bit.
Yeah.
We sparred a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you got quite a few people. You remember that little offshoot? You have Georgie's, you have McDonald and Marinos law firm, and then you had what was called Geppetto's.
Yep.
I think right now the Nespolys own that building, but the person that owned that building prior to the Nespolys was a gentleman who became a producer / sound engineer for Whitney Houston.
Oh, wow.
Right here in our town.
That is really incredible.
I mean, I could go down the list of a lot of different people who have had, a pretty interesting background, that they set their minds to do something, and they were able to go down the path of accomplishing it. And, I think of one, young man. He's now an adult. I think he's in the education field, in the Berwick public school system. But you have Mr. Robbins, right?
Okay.
Do you know his background, his story?
No, I'm not familiar with Mr. Robbins.
From what I understand, he went down the path of going to Boston College.
Okay.
And played at Boston College, but he couldn't get to first string quarterback because he was playing against a gentleman who became a nationally known NFL player.
Tough competition.
Yeah, that guy's name was Matt Hasselbeck.
Oh, okay.
Your friend Donnie, huge Seattle Seahawks fan. Robbins couldn't beat him out.
Not doing too well.
Couldn't beat him out.
Oh.
Robbins couldn't beat him out, so he had to go to IUP. But again, he accomplished that dream. He accomplished that vision of getting into that school, being productive, being competitive, and then he came back to the town, right?
Yep.
And he's given back to the town.
It's important for communities, for people that have been people like that come out of there, and they produce those types of things, to come back to your community, to show the community, like, hey, like, I did it, you can do it too.
Sure.
And I don't know if there's enough of that going on.
Yeah.
But I think if everybody that came from the communities and came back, whether or not you were super successful or not successful, and granted, life takes you different ways or whatever.
Sure.
But if you have an opportunity, you have a chance to come back and to do those things, to show, because, there's one thing that's unmatched throughout history, and you've seen it develop, and you've seen great things happen from that, and it's one word called hope. If you have hope, you can gather that, and you can, use that energy and really project yourself into something. And when you don't have hope, these are the people that, they might be so close to fighting this addiction or to accomplishing this thing, no matter how small it may be. And they're just in a place of hopelessness where they can't see it, And you're sitting here, you're telling them, you're so close, like, you're just right there. And they just can't see it because they're not in the mindset. They have, the mental thing going on, and, but if you can get some hope and interject some hope, and that's where these people, if they can come into the community, they're really a beacon of hope.
Right.
And it's just very pivotal for a young person. But we talk about young people, but it's not young people. It doesn't matter how old. Age has no, defying impact on whether or not somebody can inspire somebody else.
That's true.
Because we see people, as older you get, I think, at least for me personally, you realize that age has really no bearing on anything.
That's right.
Like you see I don't know, whatever age, 50 years old, 60-year-old, you see this guy with the same, and what I like to, on this topic, what I would, define it as it's a maturity continuum. So you mature on different levels, whether it's a physical level, you mature, you go to the gym and you work out. See, but you can see that, so you work out every single day. After a year, you're going to be looking pretty good. But now you have other things that you don't see on a mental level. You mature on a mental level. Yeah. You mature on an intellectual level. You mature on a spiritual level. Yeah. As humans, we're not just these physical, beings that are just here physically. Right. And you go argue that, but I think anybody that has ever, felt something that they couldn't explain, it's more than a physical feeling. So when we, going back to mental health and things, I think a lot of people that, might face these problems of mental health is that they've really stagnated in, maybe not mentally and intellectually, but I think the big one that they stagnate on is on a spiritual level. Because if you don't have an understanding of where you came from, then you're kind of your life is purposeless. Like,
Right.
why am I here? What is my purpose again? And, whether or not, you believe in, whether or not you believe in, God or Allah or whatever you want to call this thing, there's most definitely a higher being, or, what do you call it?
Higher power.
A higher
Yeah.
power. Yes, there's a higher power,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe you believe that everything just like atoms just like, and then we've just been here. Like, I don't know if this sounds like pretty crazy conclusion to me. But so for me personally, I have very strong spirituality. I have strong beliefs and I believe in certain things. And people, yourself and Donnie, you guys have these same strong spiritual beliefs. We're generally happy.
Sure.
We do, some days
Content.
we're content. I mean, some days you wake up and, you might not, you'd be like, oh, why am I here? But we're human. You might feel like that from time to time.
And in the counseling realm, we talk a lot about resiliency.
Okay.
So I think that's an area you were kind of diving into. There's some people that have a low level of resiliency, and then there's others that have a high level of resiliency. And we kind of use the illustration, if you have a high level of resiliency, you're like a rubber ball. You have bounce back.
Okay.
Right?
Yep. Makes
But
sense.
if you have a low level of resiliency, you're like a lead ball. And when you drop,
you're there.
You have no bounce back. There's no coming back from that low point. And so what you really have to do, like you were saying, is you have to exercise your mental health. You have to do some techniques and strategies and have some mantras, go down the path of being able to exercise your mental health through different avenues. Part of it can come through your physical fitness.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, definitely.
Spiritual fitness, I think is important, and prayer, meditation, for me and our producer, Donnie Shields of Hope. It's got God's word and listening, to some outlets that share God's word in unique ways and that can inspire us. Other people listen to podcasts, right?
Yep.
Hopefully the Speak Hope Now podcast, you're out there listening to this and gaining encouragement and gaining some strength through what Will is stating here today. And but I know there's other realms that you can receive strength from, and that's who you're connected to. And you're really connected here in our community.
I know a few people.
You know a few people, but you also
around.
know some organizations too, like Rocky Boxing. Tell us a little bit about Rocky Boxing and what they do to help. I've heard people walking into this office here sharing a lot about Rocky Boxing.
Oh,
and what
really?
it's done for them.
Oh, that's cool.
And those are elementary students and middle schoolers and high schoolers,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Not to say adults, but again, that population, I believe Rockies has made a huge difference.
I agree.
In their lives. Tell me a little bit about your involvement there and how you're connected and why you feel as though you want to make more of a difference.
I guess to talk about Rocky, we'll start from the beginning.
Sure.
If I tell a story, it's probably best to start at the beginning. So when I first heard about Rocky, I was watching the news. It was on the news. And I was like, particularly at that time of my life, I was in this mental health crisis actually. And I didn't know really what to do. There's this saying that idle hands are the devil's work. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know really what to do. I was kind of in this predicament of just really, I was like, what am I going to do? So I seen this on the news, seen, Rocky Boxing. He was like in the gym with the kids and stuff. And I actually lived just down the road, and I just literally watched the commercial, put on my shoes, and just walked right over there. And I had this, desire to just, when I seen those kids and I seen like his message of helping out the community, back to, being that beacon of hope and that light and coming from the community, I thought maybe this is a good opportunity for me to, to make this change. And, I went in there, he was there, talked to him, and told him my intentions and stuff. And, we shook hands and he said, I'm happy to have you. Let's make this thing happen. Little did I know that I was going to get into boxing. Little did I know that, where that was going to, the trajectory of where that was going to bring me. And like you said before, the community in there, it's like just a positive community. The people in there, positive people. It's like similar when you go to church. You go to church and it's just the aura around you. Mm-hmm. It's happy, it's positive, it's encouraging. It's really a life-changing environment.
Yeah.
And so being, back to, Leo, who, he's the owner of the gym and the Talanka family and those people, they really created this environment for kids, and not only kids, because they have kids classes and they have adults classes, and they created this environment for you, to grow and to progress, not only in a physical way, but it's a place, of free speech. You can go there and just talk about whatever you want. We can go in there and we can talk about boxing. We can go in there and talk about God. We can go in there and just talk about whatever we want. But it's just a place of meeting and gathering, just to, to be yourself and to progress in whichever way you want to progress. I mean, essentially, you're going there to progress in a physical way.
Right.
But as you said before, physical progression I believe physical progression is the most basic progression and the easiest progression that leads you into every other progression. Mm-hmm. And so you progress physically. Well, how does that affect your next stage? Well, mentally, because mentally you're thinking in your head, I'm going to do. Yeah. Oh, it gives you extreme clarity, and not to mention like biology with different things of how your body relates. Like dopamine is, the key thing that your body regulates. That's the thing that makes your,
serotonin,
your serotonin levels. And, what people with mental health is their serotonin levels and their dopamine levels are all out of whack.
Testosterone for men, estrogen for women.
Yep.
Yeah. All of that chemical, imbalance becomes balanced.
Starts to balance out
in the life of a person when they're, physically strong.
Yep.
And mentally stable.
Yeah, that physical strength will bring that mental stability.
For sure. And
then when you get, so now, if you physically become, which is different for everybody. Physical strength is going to vary for everybody.
Right.
80-year-old, her physical strength is going to be nowhere near one of our physical.
Some people are linemen, right?
Yes.
I'm a lineman, so I'm working out, and I tell my private trainer, Coach Wyman, I say, hey, I'm a lineman for life.
Yes, right? Exactly.
So I'm not getting off the line. I'm not going to be a wide receiver. I'm not going to be a quarterback.
Not going to throw you on a treadmill and say, hey, run like 5 miles.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen. Give me about a half a mile and I'm good for the week or something,
Right. But the lineman could do the stationary bike.
Yep.
Better than most because they can put all that weight behind the bike. And
exactly. You're just cruising. You're just cruising on the bike.
That's right. I remember some of those video games back in the day, right? And even some of the competitors that Rocky Balboa fought, and the fantasy movies that he came up with when it comes to boxing, and you have shapes and sizes of all different types of people when it comes to that realm, right?
Yep.
You have really strong, really cut guys. You have really big, really, gut heavy guys that have some, poundage when it comes to the blows that they throw out there. And even in the fight, when was that? Yesterday, the kickboxing fight where that shorter gentleman, knocked out with the flying knee kick.
Okay, I think I
see that yesterday.
I think I might have seen a clip of that. He just knocked him out.
That guy was much taller than him. I mean, a
lot bigger and everything. Yeah.
He was still able to take down a giant, so to speak, in his life.
Yep.
And it's important for us, if we want to stay physically fit, if we want to have that fitness, that we take down those giants in our way, and it's possible to take them down.
100%.
And as long as we have what you're saying, that determination, that resiliency, right? That level of motivation to take us the next level, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all that. And it's, I know we me and you kind of lean on the Bible and God and the David and the Goliath story. It's such symbolism to what you're saying to so many things in life, because really in a lot of instances in our life, we're the David, and whatever the obstacle is the Goliath, right? And when in the story of the Bible, in all regards of David, he comes to a fight with, he just has a rock and a sling. So like that kind of relates to our like, put that into our life. We're coming into a lot of situations maybe unprepared. We're going to fight these giants, and we might not be prepared. Most of the time, we're probably not prepared. Sometimes you can do everything that you to prepare for something, and it's just not enough, right? It's not enough. But the thing that you said about the determination and you know, the resiliency and the motivation is, you know, David never gave up. And ultimately that effort, you know, the conclusion of that is like he was the champion at the end of it, right?
Right.
So for us, you know, if we have that motivation and determination and we give that effort, eventually we will be the champion. We will be the victor.
And the crazy thing about that story with David is that when you really read it and you dive into it, he didn't have anybody around him that was encouraging him or building confidence in him. He only had one person, and that was God.
Exactly.
So even if we have God or a higher power in our lives that we rely on, we can overcome any challenge with just that one higher power on our side.
Yep, right? I agree.
But again, in our little small community, there are resources here, like yourself, like the Talenkas, like others, right, that we can surround ourselves with and find that strength and find that hope that you were talking about to overcome those challenges so that we can be our best in whatever we do.
Exactly.
I think of one kid, you know, that my son played with. My son plays football out of Geneva College, but he played with Tegan Wilk. And you can watch
good
Tegan
player.
Wilk.
Yeah, very good player.
On TV on Saturdays during college. He plays for Coastal Carolina.
Oh yeah, Coastal. Yeah,
And,
I see some of his stuff.
You know, I traveling around the country, you know, with my son and doing some other stuff that I do. You know, I've been able to go into a restaurant and there they are playing Coastal Carolina.
Yeah,
and I'm like, there's Tegan right there.
See him on the TV.
You hope that he comes back to our area and kind of pours in, you know, to this area to inspire others. I've talked to a lot of teenagers that were on the Berwick football team, and they were excellent on the Berwick football team.
Yeah.
But yet they go to that college level. They go to the Division I, Division II level, and they freak out.
Yeah,
literally, they get scared, and they sacrifice their dreams, and they drop out of college.
Yeah,
and
a little bit of adversity, and you know they have a hard time adjusting because, and you see it, you know, in all areas of life. When you get to the next level, you have a hard time to adjust because, you know, it's something that you haven't experienced before, and you're like, oh, well, you know, like I talked earlier about like the purpose. You know, you start to feel like, oh, is this, you know, my purpose? Is what I'm supposed to do?
Right.
But then, you know, back to what we were just saying a little bit ago, it's like the effort.
Yeah.
You know, be determined, you know, don't give up. Just keep putting the effort, and eventually you're going to be the champion, whether it's how you thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, because you see that a lot. You think, oh, I'm going to be the champion this way. But it ends up, you know, you're still a champion, just not in the way that you thought you were going to be.
Yeah.
You know.
And speaking of champions, you were talking to me about this gentleman. His nickname is Boots, and he's from out towards
Philadelphia.
the Kensington, Philadelphia side, right?
I lived in Philadelphia for a little bit. The first time I met Boots was actually, I was at a gym out there, and my coach, you know, it was sparring day Saturday. It was over the weekend. It was sparring day, and you know, he told me to meet him at the gym, and I got there, and he said, "Hey, we're going to another gym to spar," and I said, "Okay, no problem." You know, it's like mentally in my head, you know, I'm always, nobody can beat me. I'm the best at what I do. Nobody can beat me. Even if I, you know, see somebody and it's like, oh, he's probably going to beat me. That's not how I'm thinking in the moment. You know, it's not how I'm going to think. It's not going to help you. It's just not going to help. And when you think like that, you start coming up with excuses. You already start thinking of excuses and ways to say, this is why I lost. This is why this happened. This is why this happened. So I don't think like that. And when, you know, he said, you know, I said, who am I going to spar? And he said, Boots. And I said, Boots? Who's Boots? And a bunch of the other guys at the gym were there. They all started laughing. They were coming up to me. They were like, good luck, tap me on the shoulder.
Right.
I'm like, whatever, like, who's this Boots guy? I don't care. So I go over to the gym. It was in Frankfurt by Kensington. And just to give a little background of the area, when, you know, I'm driving down the street in Philadelphia, and mind you, like, you know, I'm from Berwick, I'm from this area. So when I moved to Philly, you know, it was just totally different. But I was in a part of Philly where I stayed was, you know, it was a good part of Philly. So of course, Philly's a city. There's always going to be good parts and bad. Same thing like, you know, in Berwick, there's good parts and bad parts. So our population here is 10,000. Philadelphia is about 7 million. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a lot different.
It's a lot different.
Yeah.
And so as I'm going through getting closer to North Philly, Frankfurt, and the gym's in Frankfurt, but you kind of got to go through Kensington. So when you go through Kensington, you start seeing these things that I've never seen in my life. And it's, like I was telling you before,
homelessness,
the homelessness and the drugs, and
poverty,
extreme poverty, and it's like garbage. It's just everywhere, and it's really an eye opener, and you're just thinking, what went on in these people's lives to bring them to this point.
Yeah.
And it just really had me thinking about a lot of things, and then so we go through all of that, and then we get to the gym, and I remember my coach going, lock the doors, make sure you don't leave anything you don't want stolen inside the car. So, like, at any point, somebody just break in your car and steal your stuff.
Yeah.
But then we go in the gym, Boots comes in, and I say, hey, like, I guess we're sparring today. I'm excited, can't wait. And he just kind of looks at me like, who's this guy, whatever, which is the attitude in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
When you're a boxer, there is no friendliness, like, hey, let's shake hands and be friends. No, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
Maybe after you get your butt kicked, hey, I just kicked your butt, it was nice to meet you.
Yeah.
If you beat the guy, he's probably not going to shake your hands. In fact, you better watch over your shoulder, because he might have a posse trying to beat you up because you just beat up their boy or whatever.
Yeah.
So we get in the ring, and we tap gloves, and it's probably 30 seconds, and as a boxer, the initial 30 seconds or a minute, you're kind of feeling each other out. You're getting your spacing, you're kind of throwing a jab out there, getting your spacing, and then you're watching, seeing the footwork. You're trying to see what type of movement. You're trying to get your timing right and your spacing. And I'd say it was about 2 minutes in the round when he knocked me out. It was about 2 minutes in the round.
Quick.
Yeah, well, yeah, he could have done it way faster, but he didn't know who I was, so he thought, he didn't realize that I'm an amateur with like 10 fights and I wasn't a professional. And I mean, I'm a fit guy, I look pretty good, and if you seen me, you would think, oh, maybe I was a professional, and I was very far from it. And at his level, I was very far from his level, and still am, and a lot of people aren't like near his level. He's one of the best fighters out there right now.
Wow.
But I didn't know that going in there. I didn't know that. I wish somebody would have told me. But
did you get a picture?
No, I didn't get a picture.
No,
I wasn't gonna get nothing. I was like, I'm gonna try to forget about this and go home.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a cool guy, and I go in. Gotta understand. I go into his gym. This is his gym. This is his home. I'm the threat. I'm in his house. So, I just throwing all my punches and throwing things, and, just bang, just knocking me out.
It's a different mentality, isn't it? When you get in that boxing ring, or when you're on your quote unquote territory, right?
Yep.
No matter where a boxer good on the path in Las Vegas and California, right? And any setting, and they can have that mentality that says, this is my territory. Mm-hmm. I own this place.
Yep.
And you have to have that for yourself when it comes to your mental health, right?
100%.
You have to be able to get on this path of nothing's going to overtake me, nothing's going to destroy me, nothing's going to sidetrack me from my goal in life, from my purpose in life.
Yep.
And as soon as mental health or life gets under your skin, you're toast. You're done.
Yes.
You're on the ground.
Yeah, you're on the ground.
They got the countdown going on,
yep.
right?
Yep.
And you're not getting back up because you've allowed it to get under your skin.
Yep.
And man, kudos to you for stepping in that ring, not knowing who that guy was, and coming out with your name still, Moss Man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
not
it took a
Puss
lot.
in Boots, right?
No, not Puss in Boots. No,
you came out being stronger.
Yes,
gaining a better mentality, gaining a better understanding, being strengthened physically, strengthened mentally, socially, spiritually. Man, it just sounds like it revolutionized your life.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it and to say those things, because the people out here that are watching, you might think, I've had a lot of hard things happen in my life, or I have a lot of hard things happening now. But those hard things in your life, the trajectory, you don't realize it in the moment. When I was knocked out laying on the ground, I'm like, oh man, why am I here right now? like, this is like, I do not feel good. This hurts.
Yeah.
This really hurts right now. My head's ringing. My eyes are burning. You know, these people, I'm laying on the ground. I'm looking out the corner of my eye. All these people are laughing at me. And I'm just like, why am I here right now? But after it was all done and said, the coach, you know, and Boots himself, you know, you say, you know, they're looking at me like they also gained a respect for me, and I gained a respect for myself, like you're saying, and I progressed in different ways that I didn't know that I was going to be able to progress, and I came out of this difficult situation. Yeah. It came out of this hardship, you know, and then back to you saying about the connections. Now I have this connection that I wasn't going to have before, but now next time I go back to the gym, you know, in the terms of them, they're like, oh, this is that white boy you knocked out. You know, this is the white boy you knocked out. Oh, I remember you. You stepped in the ring and, you know, I knocked you out, but you got right back up and you came right back at me. In fact, they had told me that I was the only person to ever do that.
Wow.
They said every person that ever sparred Boots that he knocked out, they would get up and they would just walk right out of the ring.
Wow.
So they're never going to forget me. So, you know, you had talked about how Boots can change the lives of these young kids and these people. Is now that I have that connection because I went through that hardship, you know, when I go to Rockies and I talk to Leo and I say, hey, you know, maybe you guys want to go down to Philly and you want to go spar with some of these guys from Philly. And now when they see me and I walk in, they're going to remember me, and it's going to be more of a respect than a hostile environment.
Right.
I'm not just some stranger walking in there now. I'm the white boy that got knocked out, and now they respect me for it.
Right. And that's important.
And that's, you know? It's very important, and with life and everything you do.
Here you were surrounding yourself with a champion, right? In Boots, and you were learning invaluable lessons, and you got back up. You got back up. Yep. I think of people like, you know, Michael Jordan. You know, I've read some interesting things online, you know, Google searches where he talks about how he failed more than he succeeded. But he was able to go out there and do it again and get back at it again and practice harder and learn and listen and was accountable. And soon he you know, reached all of his goals. He reached his potential. You know, you think of people like Peyton Manning, right? You think of a lot of people in the NFL world who, you know, you would think that they would have more successes and more wins, but the difficulty of those wins, right? The only reason they were able to be successful is because they learned from the losses. So
they learned from the losses. I mean, I'm pretty sure every one of the guys that you probably mentioned have probably said that they've learned more from their losses than they did from their wins. Right. In fact, I know Kobe Bryant said, you know, he's like, I'm glad when I lost because I learned more when I lost, you know? Yeah. And that's how it is, you know, in those difficult moments that, you know, you got to check your reality and think, you know, what I'm doing, is it the right thing? And if you lose, then you know that you're not doing what you should be doing because you lost. But if you're always winning, you know, you're never going to think that. Right. And you know, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, you know, these stories with David and Goliath is, you know, if you're always winning, and this was my David and Goliath story, because before I fought Boots, I was just knocking people out. I was winning. I was really not too contested with the people that I was up against. Not to say that there wasn't other people there that could have done that to me, because in Philly, there's lots of people there that probably could have knocked me out. But thankfully, I didn't run it. That was the first time that I ran into it. And not to mention, not to say that I didn't have hard sparring. You know, I did have hard sparring, and I did have a lot of challenges. But that was like my first, like, wow, like, what am I doing? Why am I here? And so, you know, that's the David and Goliath stories.
Sure. But you didn't allow fear to step in.
No.
You're continuing to do it. You're continuing to press forward, and you're wanting to give back and to share with others what you learned, right? So they too can have hope.
Yes, exactly.
And they can move forward. Well, Will, man, thank you so much for being here. What an inspiration, man.
Thank you. You
inspired me. Right?
Good. That's the whole purpose.
When I only have one person watching these things, It inspires me to keep going for the second one, right?
Of course,
And you just keep plugging away.
I think it's really good what you guys do here at Hope and what Donnie does.
Yeah.
And if we just keep doing, if you guys keep doing what you're doing,
yeah,
you guys are going to create a better community. Rocky Boxing, they keep doing what they do, and Georgie Bagels, these people that you mentioned before. We all just keep doing what we're doing and influence our communities in a positive way.
Yeah.
If you bringing me on here and, having somebody from the community talk to the people, and hopefully, whoever listens to this, maybe it might be one or two viewers, but maybe they talk to somebody and they talk to somebody word of mouth. And I figure if you can just inspire at least just one person, you made a difference, right?
That's right.
So, I really appreciate you taking me on, letting me talk. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I know I do that a lot.
Not at all, man. Not at all. Not at all. Thanks again, man.
Of course, appreciate it. No problem.
And remember, you can overcome any challenge. You can overcome mental health, and you heard it right here from Will. You can overcome depression, anxiety, trauma, bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. You can go down the path of accomplishing your dreams, your vision, and you can have hope in knowing that there's people in our community that you can connect with, whether it's our counseling practice, whether it's Rocky's boxing ring, whether it's a teacher, a professional in the community. There are people to help you reach your goals so that mental health and fitness doesn't collide, so that mental health and life doesn't collide. And always remember what Moss stated here today. Where there's a will, there's a way. Thanks for watching Speak Hope Now. And you can watch all of our content on the Roku channel. Just search Resurgent Life. Check out our logo and you can see all the content there. We hope to see you soon.